In today's video, we're going to discuss all things electrical system with my 1964 Buick Wildcat. We're going to start off talking about the voltage regulator. On the left is a factory original voltage regulator. To the right is what I've been running for a few years. It's a solid state voltage regulator made by Wells. They're still available online at a few places, but a VA Buick member reached out to Wells when the supply had dried up and found out that they stopped making them. So I've looked around. There is a voltage regulator that Tough Stuff sells that is solid state. Also, Corvette Central sells a kit to change out the internals of your voltage regulator. What I chose to do is I had an original voltage regulator and I've taken the lid off and I'm dipping that lid in Evaporust to make it look good. And then I took and I blasted it that you saw in the last video. It gets coats of Eastwood primer, Eastwood gloss black, and then what I do is I have taken that lid. I'm going to mark the holes, center punch where they go because the Wells cap is just glued on there, whereas the factory original screwed on there. And then I'm going through a successive size of drill bits to make the hole bigger and bigger. And don't worry, I'm not hitting that connector for the capacitor over there. The gasket is transferred from the original, and then I'm screwing it down with my impact driver in order to complete the look. And here it is completed. That lets me get a solid state regulator in a case that looks like it is completely original. Installation on the car, pretty easy. The capacitor there that they call a condenser. It just has that little bracket that slips over the ground that's on it. You've got 3 wires that are connected, and then we install it on the inner fender well. The next thing we talk about in the electrical system is going to be the battery cables. These are the original battery cables. The ends had been replaced. You also see there that I have a charging wire that was connected for my battery tender charger. One of the defects is on the positive battery cable. You can see there's a little hole that has copper in it. I looked at cables at the big box store, but you notice the clamps for the batteries are just incorrect. Not that mine are correct, but these are very small clamps. They look like what I've got on my Toyota Tacoma. I also looked at my favorite auto parts store. The issue there, on the Buick cable, there's a separate wire for the voltage regulator, and the auto parts battery cable just has this little 4-inch pigtail that I would have to crimp an extra cable to. And if you look, I've got my factory original cable, and I have a cable that comes off the parts car. The parts car has a bolted in ground cable for the regulator, and if we look at this Buick memo, it says specifically that the grounding has been improved and we don't need a cable to the generator anymore. I assume they're talking about alternator. When we talk about battery cable ends, I do want to show that a lot of folks say that we were still using spring ring battery cables in 64. And in fact, here's a picture from OPGI's website where they have lovingly restored a car and they've got a spring ring on it. But I tend to disagree. If you crack open the 64 service manual, not 1, not 2, but 3 different pages show the clamp type battery cables. I also looked out and said, all right, if I can't get them locally, can I get the cable for this car? There's a reproduction out there, but 1, it's way too long, and then 2, it doesn't have that accessory ground cable. CustomBatteryCables.com will make you a battery cable, and they ask which cable do you want on your vehicle. Well, actually, I want the smaller one. To me, the smaller one looks more correct. This is another video off YouTube, and you can see they've got the upgraded battery cables, And to me, that just sticks out. You know, as much as I can, I would like my engine compartment to look factory correct. So I want to show you, I had a whole parts car and I took it apart and I put the parts in these paper boxes. I've also got some parts to my car there. I've got gas tanks, chrome pieces, etc. I looked in my box of wiring harnesses and I happen to have a battery cable from my parts car. It's got a replacement in on it, but outside of that, it's factory correct, and you know, it looks flexible, so I think I can use it. From an electrical standpoint, it's all about conductivity, and even though the cable is ugly at the clamp, if you look in the ends of it, that is shiny copper under there, and that means that this is probably going to be a good cable. Easy way to check that, get out your voltmeter, put it on ohms, and let's look what the resistance is between one end of the cable and the other end of the cable once we're not messing with any clamps in the equation. 0.1, hey, 0.0 is the lead, so you're good at 0.1. So I got some vinyl red duplicolor vinyl spray, and I am taking some 2000 grit sandpaper just to rough up the cable, and I go through my Eastwood pre-prep to clean it up. Usually most coatings need a little bit of bite on the surface to dig into here, so that's why I didn't just put it on glossy. We take it outside to the painting buck and I follow the instructions, and it gets a few coats of paint of the vinyl dye. I hang it up inside to dry, and reading through the directions say that it is safe to touch in 30 minutes and can be handled in 1 hour, but I wanted this to turn out really good, so in my case what I do is I just let it dry overnight. So the next day I feel like that it's dry, and I come and I take this off of my makeshift drying stand, which is also an engine hoist, and I take the clamp style cable end off of my previous battery terminal, and I'm going to transfer it to the battery cable that I just painted. Now this has given me some fits. The bolt does not want to come out of there. We'll try it with just the wrench in, but we're not going to be successful with this. And modern problems require modern solutions, so we are going to get out the Kleins and we are just going to cut the end of the cable off because we're not going to reuse that clamp. And into the scrap bin it goes. Now I just go through a process of making a really good connection. I'm going to make sure that the cable is stripped just right. I want to have as much contact with the clamp as I can, but I don't want strands coming out the top of the cable where they shouldn't be. And, you know, I want it to present well and have the insulation right up there to the end of the clamp. On the negative cable, the first thing I do, just like the positive one, is we're going to check the resistance on that. And it's at 0.2. We know that that could be better, so I'm going to take the end of the connector off and I'm going to clean the copper on both ends. And on this side we're making shiny metal. Shiny is good for electrical conductivity. You don't want any oxidation in between it, you don't want any paint, you don't want any grime. So this is just a good general cleanup. Watch your thumbs, boys and girls. Same process as the positive. We are just cutting it to make sure that we've got the proper amount of wire, not to have naked wire outside of the connector and not to have wire sticking over where that thing would screw down to the battery. So now we look at it with the ohm meter, 0.1, 0.0. Hey, we've done our work here. My last step is I'm putting some Mother's Back to Black on this just to give it a good cleaning, gloss it up a little bit. And then we're going to stick it to the side here with all my other parts that are waiting for the engine to come back that are ready to go. So putting the battery in here, I have bought a Super Start battery from O'Reilly Auto Parts because it has a flat top and taken off the electrical protectors right here. And the reason I bought this flat top battery is I bought this battery topper from Legendary Battery Toppers for $67. I had to cut the top because the battery does have this little rise around the terminals, and even with cutting an oversized hole there, I also had to kind of machine out where it goes and put 2 pieces of Velcro in it so it would sit level. They do sell some battery terminal extenders for this, but I didn't purchase them. I've got some factory battery hold down clamps right here. They were blasted and painted, and I found out that the part that goes across the battery was rubberized. So I actually bought some Plastidip at the hardware store. You can buy it in not a spray, and I dipped my handle in it, and that seemed to have reproduced the factory coating just fine. So here I'm putting it in and get everything adjusted to get the battery centered there, putting in the bottom hold down, and then getting it cinched to where it needs to be. And we've got negative battery terminal put on, and then we've got to attach that wire to the voltage regulator like what came with the car. Then we're going to attach the positive cable. Then we're going to put it in this clamp down here at the bottom, and because I haven't tightened any of the clamps yet, it's going to pop off, so we'll just pop that back on there. But you can see where it tucks in that clamp on the fender to keep it in place. Here's how it looks from the back. The next thing that we are going to talk about is the cable down to the starter. Here's a picture of the factory original, and you are looking at a 55-year-old cable. This one, goes down by a hot exhaust manifold to get to the starter. And when I took it off the car, if you look on the right there, what I found is that the insulation just peeled off its original asphalt insulation, and you don't want naked wire right there by the starter. I found a cable at Midway Muscle Cars for $53 shipped. And that cable, it looks pretty much factory original. It's part 33280. I don't think it was made directly by them, but that is where I purchased it from. And it is mostly correct. It's got the asphalt coating. It's got the correct color wires. It's got the purple and the yellow. They're using a flat terminal that is bent over, whereas the original cable used something called a flag connector, but these flag connectors are just hard to find. It is the same length as the original, so installation of that is relatively simple. No motor in the car, so it snakes around to the power steering area and then up the wall to that junction box, which is the horn relay. And what I've got to do is push the cable into another one of those little clamps there. You've got a single bolt where the battery comes to it, and then you've got the wires that go off to the rest of the wiring harness. Then we've got the other 2 wires for the starter. That's just a simple press fit. And then I've got the battery disconnected for this, but we're just tightening down the cable. If you look at the tip top there, that's where the horn connects to. The next thing that we're going to talk about is the starter, or what General Motors sometimes referred to as the cranking motor. I wish I had taken more pictures, but I've only got the one, and that's when I was shipping it off with the motor to be rebuilt. Now, my particular starter, I took a look at it, and I look at the part number that's on it, and the part number gave me some good news, and that's a part number that is for 64 and 65 GM cars for the 401 425 engines, according to V8Buick.com. And if we look at the date codes on it, that is to the right, you have a 4B14. So 4 is the year, 1964, B is February of the month, 14 is the day of the month. So my car was made on the 26th of February, so the 14th day is correct for when the starter should be done. Those stamp parts usually precede the car. So here is a picture of the rebuilt starter. I'll probably repaint that nose cone, but now I've still got that correctly date-coded starter for my car. The next thing we're going to talk about is the alternator. This is the alternator that came with the car when I pulled it out of the junkyard. And when I pull it up on the bench and I run the numbers over there, 8F5, so it could be a 68, 78, 88, not a 64 model. F is for the month, and that is June. And then we're going to see 5 right here. That's the 5th day, so it definitely didn't come on the car originally. Another context clue is this is stamped as a 37 amp alternator, whereas the factory was a 55. And if we go out there to Google, we see that it's for a 68 Chevrolet car. I had another alternator that came off of a Sabre that I had, and if we look at its date code, 4E5, so it could be a 64, 74, but it was May when it was made, so it didn't predate the car, so it's not correct for that car, and I'll just hang on to it. What I did is I purchased an aftermarket Valuecraft remanufactured alternator, but I did not pay $44 for it. Back in the George Bush administration, these alternators were just $18.99 plus sales tax. So that served me well. It was inexpensive. But the problem that I had is that this bolt had come loose as I had taken it off of the car. So I needed to crack it open to tighten that bolt. So I go through the process. Getting the back off is easy. It's just 4 long bolts that go through, pull out slowly, and you've got your 2 halves of an AC motor right there. When I pulled it out, I had one of the brushes come off of its mounting, and the brush is that's the way the motor works, and so I had to fix that. So in this clip right here, I'm just getting the diode disconnected, and then I will bring out this whole block where the 2 brushes sit in and make contact with the other part of the alternator. Pulling this out of the alternator, you can see one brush is still attached, but this other brush, however they had originally brazed it on or welded it on, became disconnected. So it was time to boot up the soldering station and get to work. Where you saw where it was previously attached, I scraped that off until it was shiny, and then I'm tinning solder into the brush itself, and then I've already added solder onto where it mounts to where you've got 2 things that are pre-soldered, and then you're heating them both up and then getting them to stick together. That makes a good, solid, reliable connection there. Like the manual says, reassembly is the opposite. 2 screws back in there, get the bracket down there, hook the diode back to it, and then get the brushes in there. What I do is I take a piece of wire that actually came out of Cat 5, and I'm making a loop around those brushes, because you've got to hold in the brushes at the same time you're putting something in to hold them down, because the alternator will not go back together until those brushes are in the little brushes house and they are depressed. So once I get the brushes down, I'm tying up the cable and then making sure that it will stay put so that I can put the 2 halves back together. The alternator goes back together like you took it apart. You want to make sure you know where each half was aligned, because these alternators can be reclocked. They can be put back in a different place than how you took them apart. And now that wire that went through the back is simply pulled out of the openings in order to release the brushes. You've got another bushing that goes on the front before you put the fan on it. The fan cools it while it's running. And then after that, we're going to put on the pulley. Now, the pulley was blasted and powder coated. It was heavily corroded before, and with its coating and its previous corrosion, it needed a little persuasion to be able to sit back down on top. Now I'm doing light technical taps here, because if you really go to town, you're going to hurt it. Now I'm putting the nut on, and I want to make sure this is tight with my AC powered impact wrench, but the thing is I found that impact socket will not fit it. We are going to put on our safety squints and do something they say don't do, and that's put a regular socket onto the end of the impact and get it tightened down. And this is how it turned out. Now I take it down to my auto parts store and actually get it hooked up to test and see, did I do a good job? So it's going through its paces right now. It is passing each phase of the test, and overall it passed. So we know the alternator is good to go. Next we're going to talk about the horns. And the horns, there wasn't anything wrong with them. They didn't look that good, and I'm trying to make components look good that are under the hood. They just had paint go away. They had a little bit of rust on the back of them. Didn't want to blast them, so I found this stripper here that is safe for use on metal. You can't buy it in California. It's got 50% volatile organic compounds, and it says keep out of reach of children. You can see it's already corroded itself, so I guess it'll be a pretty good stripper. So each horn gets a very liberal layer of stripper to start working its magic. And here you can see it did a really good job on the front. So take it inside, and that old paint on that aluminum, it's just wiping right off. But on the back side of these, I did have to put on another coat of stripper just because the paint was really stubborn. I still didn't get all the paint off. Now I've got it in the sink trying to get into those little bitty spots, and I'm keeping the water out from between where the two sides of it are clamped together. And then I'm really going to get in there and get all of the detritus out of there from this process. A lot of detail work going on here. And then I'm using my blowgun to try to get out any water and get them dried off. I'm using a new product here because I couldn't get the paint off of the back, and I did sand it, but I'm using a Rust Restore on them. Follow the manufacturer's directions, give it the amount of coats that they say that it's required. Then I'm going to sand down that primer because I found that a lot of primer, it will leave it pretty coarse feeling if you don't sand it down. Then I've got my 2 medium coats of the Eastwood chassis black paint, like the rest of my accessories are painted. And here they are after the painting. The backside, you can see a few places where the old paint has, it's kind of got that telegraph where you can see it wasn't stripped. If we look in the service manual, there is a way to find out if the horns are performing like they are supposed to. And if you look in the instructions there on number 2, you put an ammeter between it, and you're looking to make sure each horn draws between 4.5 and 5.5 amps. Now, if you were have to adjust the horn, here is where it is adjusted. We're going to get the Kepco supply, and we're going to try to get as close as we can to 12.0 volts. Do a little bingo there, and we're going to end up at 12.01, but that's the closest I can get, so we're going to take that for now. The horns are mainly grounded through the screw, but I'm still going to scrape this off right here and scrape some on the other side where the car is. So we've got our ground connected. Now we're going through an ammeter, and wait, it's drawing 4.4 amps, but it sure isn't making a sound, so let's see what's going on. Oh, we're maxing out the Kepco, and our voltage is dropping. So we've got a solution for that. We're going to get out the Astron power supply that will go to a much higher current. Now we're going to get that down to 12 volts, and then we're going to give it another try. Okay, so we've got the one connected, and we want to be between 4.5 and 5.5. We're right at 4.5, and that one's good. Ignore the negative symbol. It's just the way the meter's hooked up. Now we'll do the other horn here, and we're looking between 4.5 and 5.5, and that one is 5.2, 5.3. I'm not going to adjust it. It's exactly to book spec now, both together. Now I'm going to install the horns, and they simply install against the front there with 2 screws. They're not actually bolts, but rather screws that attach, and get them both side by side, get them adjusted up correctly. The reason that I'm mounting them like I'm mounting them is that the earliest picture that I have of the car shows them in this orientation, so that may not be correct. If it's not, if yours are different on a Wildcat or a big car, please let me know in the comments. Here it is complete, and the last thing I'm going to do is hook up the horns. You've got that green wire that goes to a terminal on each one of them that just slips on. And we'll get this one connected down low underneath where it lives. And now we're going to push down on the connector just to get a little clearance so the hood isn't going to hit it. So that's how those turned out. Give it a try. We are good to go. Thank you so much for watching, and please join us for the next episode.